I grew up in a wonderful home with really great parents in Southern California, youngest of 4 girls, and had parents that took me to church once a week, took all of us to church once a week, were very faithful in that. And so I had a real strong foundation of who God was, but didn't necessarily believe or know who Jesus was. So Jesus seemed to be up there in the clouds somewhere. At the age of right around 6th grade, so I was around 11 years old, we started to go to a Christian Protestant church, and there I was introduced to the Jesus who could actually be in my heart. And I learned a little bit more about him, but I didn't actually invite him into my life. Shortly after that, at that same church, I started to attend the youth group. And in the youth group, I met a really cute boy. And that really cute boy we called Dave in our book, Secret Survivors. And Dave had asked me if I wanted to ride home that night. And that ride home led to a series of me lying to my parents about me going to the youth group, when in reality I was going to be alone with him. And I fell hard for this guy named Dave. I just was in total puppy love. But, you know, to a puppy, love is very real. And I was like that. I was just smitten with this guy. And really at the age of 14, I thought, I'm gonna marry Dave. I couldn't be more wrong. But shortly into our secret relationship, he date raped me. And 2 weeks later, I was getting ready to sing a solo at church, and he broke up with me right before the solo. And I can remember that day like it was yesterday, because I just could not believe this guy who said repeatedly, I love you, I love you, I love you, we'll be together forever, had broken up with me and said the words, I never loved you, it's over. And so I kept what had happened to me, the sex against my will, a secret. And I just didn't tell anybody about it for 5 years. And during those 5 years, that secret just manifested itself in really ugly ways. It just started to grow. And I began to drink, and I began to have sex, and I began to, you name it. I experiment with drugs. I mean, it started with one beer, and then it went to the 6-pack, and then it went to being the queen of beer bongs at a party, and then it went to cigarettes, and someone said, let's try pot, and I said yes, and then I said, I'm willing to, you know, you're never content with just the one beer. It always, you know, drinking and partying and filling that hole that was so big in my heart. I just could never fill it. And as anybody knows who's tried to fill a hole that only God can fill, I was really, really unsatisfied. So I kept it a secret for a long time, and my lifestyle just began to get more and more messy and out of control. But you would never know it, because I learned really well how to maintain a pretty good image, to the point where I was voted homecoming queen my senior year of high school, and really put together. I was wearing a mask that obvious, that nobody really knew about my secret, but yet it was absolutely eating me up inside. And so at the age of 19, by the grace of God, I'm at a Christian university, and I heard a woman share her testimony about being date raped. And it just clicked for me for the very first time that what had happened to that little girl, Megan, at the age of barely 14 years old, by an older guy in the youth group, was something called date rape. And I remember just feeling like, I feel like I want to throw up as I'm hearing her tell her story. I feel like I want to go run out of the room. There were thousands of people listening to her story that day. And I did. I got up and I ran out. I bolted to my dorm room, rolled up in a little ball, and kind of cuddled with my teddy bear. His name was Brian. He was given to me by a boyfriend, go figure. But I remember just rolling up in a ball and crying and crying and crying until there were no more tears left. And then I called my mom, and I said, Mom, I was date raped by Dave. And she said, we'll do whatever it takes, your dad and I, to help you get the healing that you need. So it was the first time I had exposed my secret. And thank God, I exposed it to someone who believed me and trusted me. That was key. And my mom and dad both did. And so the very next day, I started my journey to healing. And my life has been radically changed ever since, because that journey to healing for me was really reigniting with my Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ, and inviting him into my healing process, which I really didn't have much of a relationship with him before that time. So that was when I would say I became a disciple of Christ. At the same time, I'm going through intense therapy and working through the pain that little girl went through at the age of 14 years old, and working through some pretty tough questions. A girl's body is a part of her own soul. It's part of who she is. It's part of how God crafted us all together, heart, mind, body, and soul. So you can't separate what you're doing. And I would say to the man and to the boy who is feeling like, I want to go all the way, or I want to let myself go here with this girl, I'd say, don't you dare do that, because you will cause a scar on that girl's life forever. I mean, I have a scar, and thank God I've allowed God to use my scar, use my pain. I've given him permission to, but it wasn't without a pretty high cost, pretty high price tag of 5 years of having a secret of being violated.
Your passion that beats for Christ alone.
Jessica is another story in our book, and she is a lot like a lot of the other people in our book. She had a lot of energy and loved to perform, loved to have an audience, and she was 17 years old when she was raped by her uncle, and did not tell anyone until she didn't tell her family until she was 21. So it was during those years of carrying her secret that she kind of decided to act out while she was holding on to that pain. Did a lot of drinking, had a lot of sex, hung with the wrong crowd, and just kind of added some more secrets to her bag. And developed ulcers and lots of physical pain that came from carrying her secret. She eventually told the man that she ended up marrying, while they were dating, she told him what had happened to her. And that was the first time that she had told anyone. And when she told him, the reaction that she got from him was so compassionate and so filled with love that it really gave her this sense of peace, that she was no longer walking in this alone. But it was still several years before she opened up and told her parents. And it was after she started going to counseling that she was finally able to tell her parents what had happened. And the biggest reason that she didn't want to tell her parents was because it was a family member who had done this to her. And there was that feeling of, I probably had something to do with it. I probably was at fault somehow. And she felt like, you know, what is this going to do to her family when they find out that it was, you know, someone in the family that did this to her. So when she finally did sit down to tell her family, she brought her fiance at the time in with her, and kind of just came out of nowhere for her family, because she had led them to believe that she was going to counseling to deal with issues from the divorce, which had happened when she was 9. Again, she had gotten really good at keeping secrets and telling lies to her family. So she was going to counseling for a couple of years before she brought them in, and her parents walked in and just were blindsided when she just came out and told them that her uncle had raped her when she was 17. And it took years for her to finally get to a place where she could even say that he had raped her. For a long time, she would say that my uncle made me have sex with him. Because for her, she had such a hard time wrapping her mind around the fact that, you know, there was no knife held to her throat. There were no threats made. It took her a long time to understand that she had been emotionally manipulated into having sex with him, and that is the same as rape. So when she finally told her parents, that's when her ulcers started to subside, and she started to feel like she could breathe again. And then, of course, she had to watch her parents deal with the pain and the grief and the trauma of processing through that. And she says in the book that she didn't really handle that well, and she wished her counselor would have helped her do that differently, because she basically told her parents, I've already been dealing with this for a few years, so I don't really want to talk about this with you. I don't want to deal with it anymore. So you deal with it in your own way. I'm dealing with it in my own way. And so it was a couple of years of awkwardness, of walking on eggshells, and not really feeling like it had done a whole lot of good to come out and tell it, other than for herself, feeling like, I feel better now because it's off my chest. She knew deep in her heart, much like what Megan said, that there was something to come out of this pain, that God could use this pain for something. And so that's why Jessica wanted her story to be in the book as well, because she really wanted to make sure that people who have experienced any kind of sexual molestation in the family, where it's so prevalent, and so many people have carried that secret, to know that, number one, you're not alone, and number two, it's okay to take that next step and start the healing process by telling someone your secret. Whitney was a girl who was the oldest child of two. She was just a really strong girl, outgoing personality, really smart, grew up in a great Christian family, knew that she was loved by her parents, loved her brother, even though he was a little brother and sometimes kind of annoying. And she was just, kind of the star pupil at school and was the popular girl in the youth group. When she was in high school, she started dating, the first guy that she dated was kind of like the bad boy. And she thought, I can save him, I can bring him to the other side. And quickly found out that really wasn't her calling. That wasn't going to work out. So after that, she started dating another guy from the youth group, and quickly into their relationship, they started having sex on a regular basis and never told anyone, not even their best friends, and went to the doctor and found out she was pregnant, and really didn't know what to think of that. Didn't tell anybody until she was back at school, and then decided to call her boyfriend and say, I'm pregnant. And she's really not sure how they got to this decision, but pretty much they mutually decided that she should have an abortion. And so he wired her the money, and she drove herself like a few hours to go to this abortion clinic by herself, sat in the room by herself with her feet in the stirrups, and she describes it as almost being like in a barber shop where all the chairs were just lined up, and teenage girls were just sitting in each chair as the doctors and nurses went from chair to chair performing the procedures. She held on to the effects of that. There were sound effects, there was the pain, the physical pain, the emotional pain of what happened, lived with her for years. But even just a few short months after that abortion, she got pregnant again after a weekend visit with her boyfriend. And she said, I still don't know how someone can make the same horrible decision twice, but that's what she did. And so he wired her money again. And this time she had a new roommate and felt like she could trust this girl enough. And so her roommate actually drove her to the abortion that time. She had it done again and went back to school and went back to trying to live her life. And as days and weeks and months went by, she just started to deteriorate as a person. She was no longer getting good grades. She was no longer engaged socially with any of her friends. She was feeling totally disconnected from her boyfriend, who was at another school. And bit by bit, just started feeling like she was falling apart on the inside. She finally decided to transfer to her boyfriend's school, hoping that maybe being closer to him and having some sort of a connection to him would make her feel a little bit better. And when she got there, he told her that he had cheated on her. And at that point, she just pretty much fell apart completely, and did what she could to get through each day, but really wasn't living. She says that she had become a shell of herself. There was nothing inside anymore. But her mom got her into counseling and started getting her some help to lead her towards healing. And it took many, many years. Whitney really wanted to make sure that other people heard her story, because she had grown so much as a result of finally telling her secret and the healing that has come of that. She wanted to make sure that for other girls who are out there who have gone through abortions and are carrying that secret and that shame and that hurt, that they could find hope and that they could find encouragement and find healing for themselves.
Your passion that beats for Christ alone. Your passion.
Matt was a young boy who was under a tremendous amount of pressure from mom and dad to look perfect, to perform, to please. And he was just this boy who had this boundless energy. In fact, you'll read in his story, they call him Sparky when he was little because he just had so much energy and was kind of magnetic personality type. But that personality was, it needed an outlet. It needed a place to talk openly about his struggles and even the pressure that he felt from his family to perform, and he really didn't have one. And sadly, he found that outlet through pornography. And he tells a story about watching pornography or viewing pornography for the very first time. It was a total innocent thing, like it is with most people who are checking out pornography for the first time. He was just on his computer and there was a pop-up ad, and the pop-up ad enticed him, and he just was hooked from that the very first time he saw that ad. And then he began to become very sneaky with his times of viewing pornography on the internet. Middle of the night, when all the lights would go off, he would sneak to the computer room and watch the shows. And that's where his addiction started, and that was at 9 years old. Pornography is so prevalent in our world today, and when Matt was growing up, it wasn't as talked about. It wasn't something that people said, I struggle with this, I have less problems. I mean, that was something that today is still difficult to admit to, and it probably always will be, but it was even more difficult then, which was 15 years ago, because nobody talked about their addiction to pornography. And so there's no way Matt would even say, I view porn, let alone I'm addicted to pornography. I mean, you know, he was just 9, 10, 11, 12, 13 years old, and those are things that the church that he went to just don't talk about. So there was this silence factor in his life of, you just stay silent, nobody will know, it won't impact the way I view people or view girls. And that was a big fat lie, because it began to impact every relationship that he had. He began to see girls that he would walk by, and he would be the first to say, I would lust after every girl I began to see, because the filters of my eyes went from pure, before I started viewing pornography, to these filters of all I can see is a naked figure when I see women, because that's what his mind saw almost every night when he went to the computer to go view pornography. Then he got caught, and his parents caught him. And it was a big deal, as you can imagine, and he was so embarrassed, like most people who get caught are. And he really downplayed it to his mom. No, it was no big deal. It was just a few times. And his mom took his computer away for 30 days. And then after 30 days, he got it back again. Well, guess what he did at the day he got it back? He viewed pornography again. Because for those who understand addiction, for those of you who are addicted, you get it is luring. It calls you to it, whatever it might be, whether it's pornography or masturbation or eating disorder, or food, alcohol, drugs. It calls you to it because you're addicted. You cannot think clearly when you have addictions. You just can't. And it's an out of control, compulsive drive that you have that you cannot stop alone. There is not a chance in the world you can stop an addiction without help, without really a support group around you. And Matt was no exception to that. So he eventually did get a lot of help. He went to a program that we run at our church called Life Hurts, God Heals. And it's an 8-step recovery program, support group for students with pain, unresolved pain, which is almost every student you see today. And his life, he would say also, his life began to change, because there he started to work through the steps. The step one of Life Hurts, God Heals is the G in God Heals, and it's get help. I admit that I'm powerless on my own. And every single one of the steps have a biblical principle based on the Beatitudes below that. So he was saying the steps, I'm powerless on my own over my pornography addiction. I mean, that's a powerful thing for him to say every day of his life. And then step 2 is open your heart. I believe that God exists, that I matter to him, and that he is the only one with the power to heal my pain. And as he began to really let that kind of saturate his soul and soak into his being, he realized, I am powerless. I can't do this without the help of God and without the help of my small group. So he had a small group of guys who were his own age, with a leader leading him through the steps and leading him through the prayers and the questions, and really his pain, because no addiction, nobody has an addiction without it pointing back to a pain. And usually it's a pain that started in their childhood. Almost always it's a pain that started with their childhood. And that was the case with Matt. Step 3 is depend on Christ. And that's where someone realizes they can no longer depend on themselves. They have to completely depend on God for his strength, his power. And then really step 4 is one of the most powerful ones, because step 4 is it's called hear and speak. And really the step 4 takes a while. In the recovery world, like Alcoholics Anonymous, Narcotics Anonymous, etc., step 4 is where you do a life inventory. And it's also true with Life Hurts, God Heals. You start an inventory from the age of when you were a little child. And there's several questions, several pages of questions like, do I have any family secrets? Is there anything I'm not allowed to talk about? Is there anything that has happened in my life that I'm ashamed of? What was my best memory as a child? What was the hardest thing for me to remember as a child? So it really stirs the pot, and it's a great thing. And then you have to answer questions. Do I have any resentments today? Is there any bitterness that I'm holding on to today? And it's very effective. Step 4 is really effective because for the very first time, you are literally, if you do it right, you're looking that pain smack in the face and you're saying, you will no longer own me. And then step 5 is really working through, okay, what does this mean now? So I'm still bitter, so I'm still resentful. What do I do with that? And that's where you begin to make, quote, amends with people. You offer forgiveness to those you have hurt, and you ask for forgiveness. And you offer forgiveness to those who have hurt you, and you ask for forgiveness to people who you have hurt. So it's a very, very powerful part in the healing process. And anybody who's ever had pain, who's worked through it thoroughly, you know you cannot get through it without forgiving the person who violated you or offended you or hurt you. And in Matt's case, he had to forgive his parents because there was a lot of pressure in that home. And then he had to forgive himself for the shame and the guilt that he had for his pornography addiction.
Your passion that beats for Christ.